I didn't cry when I opened the envelope. But I did stop what I was doing. Just stared at it for a while. It was the kind of envelope that smelled like effort. Cream-colored. Rose gold trim. Slightly scented, faintly floral, like something from a bridal catalog. My name on the front, no title. Just Clarice. I already knew what it was before I even opened it. Inside, join us in celebrating the engagement of Camille Dalton and Jonathan Pierce. No +1. No hope you can make it. Not even a scribbled note in the corner. Just the card. And then, about 5 minutes later, a text. Camille, don't feel obligated. Just try not to wear anything too serious. I put my phone down on the desk. Face down. I didn't reply. She always had a way of slipping a knife in while smiling. I sat there in my chambers at the courthouse, quiet space, soft lamplight, a half-finished ruling waiting in front of me, and let myself remember. Not the good things, just the truth. Camille's always been the star. She was the glitter, the spotlight, the girl who could make our parents laugh just by walking into a room. Me, I was the one who read court transcripts at 13. The one they called too serious. Camille once threw a party when we were teens, didn't even tell me. I was upstairs the whole time. She told the guests I was at debate camp. I wasn't. I was in my room, headphones on, trying not to exist. I don't know why she invited me now. Maybe because not inviting me would have looked bad. Maybe because she assumed I'd decline, or maybe it was just a move on a chessboard she didn't realize I still knew how to play. I looked down at the card again. Her name printed bigger than his. Gold foil, so perfectly her. My clerk Mara stepped in just then. She's young. Smart. Sharp-eyed. You okay, Judge? She asked. I nodded. Just family. She gave me a soft, knowing smile. That says a lot in 2 words. Then she left me alone again. I sat back. Let the quiet settle. Let the moment breathe. And then, without fanfare, without drama, I opened my calendar. The 16th of December. No hearings. Court recess. Wide open. I stared at the date for a long second. Then I opened my browser, found a flight, and booked it. Hotel 2, somewhere not too close to the estate. I didn't want spa brunches or welcome mimosas. Later that night, I pulled out the black dress. The one I wore to a federal appointment ceremony. The same one I wore the day I sentenced a man who thought he was too important to ever face consequences. Simple. Clean lines, tailored, no sequins. No lace. Just authority. I packed it into a garment bag. Folded carefully, pressed flat. Like I was packing quiet strength. And maybe I was. I wasn't going to make a scene. Wasn't going to pick a fight. But I also wasn't going to show up just to smile and disappear into the wallpaper. Not this time. I arrived 5 minutes early. Not 10. Not 15. 5. Exactly enough to avoid walking in late, but not so early they'd think I had nowhere else to be. The estate sat on a hill just outside Charleston, a place with a name like the Viridian, the kind of name that sounds more like a perfume than a building. Everything about it screamed curated elegance. Valet parking, white stone steps, 2 greeters in matching navy. Inside, the air was warm, thick with the scent of sugar, peony, and expensive hairspray. Glass walls, chandeliers, tall flower arrangements too big to talk over. The hostess at the front gave me a polite smile. She didn't ask my name. Just handed me a flute of champagne and said, "Welcome." Not a flicker of recognition. Not that I expected one. Camille always made sure I was invisible in spaces like this. I held the glass without drinking. Walked in slow. The room was already full. Voices, bouncing laughter, layered over classical strings from a live trio in the corner. Every woman wore a dress that glinted under the lights. Every man had a watch you could probably Google and find a 4-digit price tag. And then I saw her. Camille. She looked stunning. Sequins, fake smile and all. She was in the center of everything, floating from group to group, air kissing, laughing in just the right pitch. Not too loud, not too shy. always at ease. That was her talent. She spotted me across the room, and her expression shifted for a fraction of a second. Then she lit up. "Look who made it," she called, her voice carrying easily. I smiled, a small one. She made her way over, arms wide, perfume trailing behind her. "Clarice," she said, pulling me into a hug that didn't last long enough to feel real. "You came." I said I would. She pulled back, her eyes scanning my outfit. "You wore black," she said, laughing a little. "It's what I own," I said. She leaned in, dropping her voice so only I could hear. "Try not to make things awkward, okay? Jonathan's family is intense about appearances." I nodded once. "I'll be on my best behavior." She laughed again, louder this time, like we'd just shared a joke. Camille drifted back into the crowd. And I stood there, glass still in hand, watching her introduce a woman in peach satin as a rising designer in the bridal world, then a man in a navy suit as Jonathan's cousin, Harvard MBA total genius. She never gestured toward me. Not once. I didn't mind, I didn't need the title. But it was telling. That she could list someone's full resume from across the room and not once say my name. I walked slowly around the edge of the room, nodding when someone made eye contact, accepting polite half smiles from women who didn't seem sure whether to say hello. The room buzzed with talk of wedding colors, registry, gifts, a honeymoon in Tulum that might get pushed if Jonathan's work trip to London doesn't move. I found a seat near the back, half hidden behind a vase of white orchids that had been arranged like an accidental wall. Good. I didn't want to be part of the performance. The food arrived in stages. Some kind of duck. Overcooked. The sauce too sweet. Like everything else in the room, presentation over substance. I asked for water instead of more champagne. Across the room, I saw my mother in a lilac wrap dress, smiling with her shoulders too straight, wearing a necklace I'd sent her 3 birthdays ago. She'd never said thank you for it. Now she was wearing it like it had always belonged. My father stood nearby, quiet as always, nodding politely while someone Camille introduced as Jonathan's godfather rambled about wine pairings. Neither of them looked toward me. Not once. I didn't wave. Didn't expect anything more. And then about halfway through the duck, Jonathan made his way over. He was taller than I expected. Polished. The kind of man who probably keeps a spare blazer in his car just in case. He smiled as he approached. Friendly, like he'd been told to be. "Clarice, right?" he asked. "Camille's sister." I nodded. "That's me." "She didn't talk about you much," he said. "I wasn't sure if you two were close." I held his gaze. "We're sisters." He laughed awkwardly. "She said you do something with the county." There it was. Something with the county. Admin. Records. Files. Paperwork. I let the silence sit for a beat. Then I gave a small smile. "Something like that." He nodded as if that closed the loop. Then he gestured toward the table. "Hope they're treating you okay. Let me know if you need anything." And just like that, he was gone. Back to Camille. Back to the sparkle. I didn't feel offended. I didn't feel hurt. I felt ready. I leaned back in my chair, looked around the room again. Watched Camille toss her hair over her shoulder as another round of laughter surrounded her. I wasn't here to fight. Wasn't here to expose. Not yet, but I wasn't here to fade either. The last time I was underestimated this much. A man lost custody of 3 children. And I never raised my voice. The room shimmered, so did the lie. Light bounced off the chandelier like it had somewhere better to be. Everything sparkled, glassware, sequins, teeth. The music had softened into something string-heavy and expensive, the kind of background sound designed to flatter rather than move. Dinner was winding down. Plates half cleared. Wine glasses refilled more out of habit than taste. The duck hadn't improved with time, still overcooked, still drowned in syrupy glaze. People leaned into each other more now, liquor loosening smiles, elbows, opinions. Phones had come out angled discreetly, ready to catch the toasts and the tears, the Instagram moments. I sat at my table near the back, still behind the white orchids, still invisible by design. But not by accident. Across the room, Camille moved through the crowd like a bride at her own rehearsal dinner, which I suppose she nearly was. She wore a second dress, now lighter, cream-colored, soft at the edges like a filtered photo. Her hair had been touched up. Or maybe just fluffed. Either way, it bounced more. Jonathan was by her side, hand on the small of her back, smiling like a man who thought the world worked exactly as it should. He wasn't wrong. Not yet. Camille laughed at something one of her bridesmaids said. Then she looked out over the room and gave a tiny nod. A signal. She reached for her champagne flute. Picked up her fork. Tapped twice. Ting. Ting. The room hushed. Phones tilted upward, all eyes on her. And mine. Camille smiled wide, holding her glass just high enough to catch the light. First of all, she began, voice warm and smooth like a podcast host, thank you really for being here tonight. It means the world to us. A round of polite applause followed. She waited just long enough to let it settle. I know this looks like something out of a bridal magazine, she said with a little laugh, but I promise you there were a lot of late nights, caffeine, and spreadsheets to get here. Soft laughter. Heads nodded. Phones angled to record. I wasn't always this graceful, she went on with the kind of practiced humility that photographs well. Growing up, I was. Well, let's say spirited. More laughter. She glanced sideways at me. My sister Clarice. That pause again. Like she was saying my name for dramatic effect. She was the opposite. Very structured, very serious. People turned to look at me, just briefly. Then turned back to her. She once filed a formal report because I borrowed her sweater without asking. I was 13. Laughter. Bigger this time. The kind of laugh people use when they think it's safe. She's always been that way. Camille continued, waving her hand gently, like she was brushing away dust. Judgy. Rigid. You know, by the book. I didn't move, didn't blink. She even made a chart for how to load the dishwasher, she added, sweet as pie. I wish I were kidding. The room chuckled on cue. And I just sat there, hands folded, fork resting against the edge of my plate. The lie wasn't loud. But it sparkled. And for this room that was enough. Camille looked out over the crowd, again beaming. The kind of smile that's rehearsed in the mirror, just enough teeth, just enough warmth. Jonathan stood beside her, hand resting lightly at the small of her back. Proud. Relaxed. Like a man who believed he was exactly where he was supposed to be. She nudged him gently with her elbow. He took the cue. Well, he said, lifting his own glass. I can't follow that. Laughter. Another safe laugh. He turned toward me now, nodding politely. But really, can we just say how lucky we are that Clarice made time to be here tonight? Heads turned again. Eyes back on me. Camille said you work in. What was it? He paused, looked at her. County records. I didn't answer. Not yet. He smiled. The kind of smile people use when they think they're being charming. Or maybe admin, either way sounds like important paperwork. A ripple of laughter. Smaller this time. Camille's eyes sparkled, lips pressed together like she was trying not to laugh. She leaned her head against Jonathan's shoulder for a beat, like the joke had landed perfectly. I set down my fork, quietly. Wiped the corners of my mouth with my napkin. Folded it once. Neatly. I didn't feel angry, didn't feel humiliated, I felt done. Done with being mistaken. With being reduced. With playing along. But I still said nothing. Not yet. I took a sip of water. Cool, flat, still. And waited. Let them finish their toast. Let them finish their moment. I wasn't here to interrupt, I was here to end it. The last laugh hadn't even faded when I lifted my gaze and met Jonathan's eyes. I'm sorry, I said, voice steady. Where did you hear that? His smile faltered just a little. He glanced at Camille. She mentioned it. Something with office work, government admin, or something like that. Camille chuckled, brushing a hand through her hair. Oh, come on, Clarice. Don't be so dramatic. I didn't look at her. I don't work in administration, I said. Another pause. A longer one. I'm a judge. Silence. Not the polite kind. The kind that slides in like a draft under a locked door. Cold, inevitable. Jonathan blinked. You're a what 11th district? Superior Court. I reached for my water again. Took another sip. Set it down. From somewhere to my left, a voice whispered, "Wait, Judge Dalton." Another guest leaned toward their phone under the table. I could see the faint glow of Google. Fingers moving fast. Another voice. She handled that Eastman case. I saw her in the Atlantic. Camille's face had lost its glow. Still smiling, but the corners were pulling. Tight. Uncertain. Jonathan's hand dropped from her back. My mother, still seated across the room, looked like someone had opened a window behind her. Stunned. Slightly winded. No one said a word. I didn't need them to. I let the silence stretch. Let the air shift. No gloating, no speech, just truth. It didn't need an audience. It only needed space. Camille opened her mouth. Nothing came out. She looked at me like I'd rewritten her lines in a play she thought she was directing. Someone near the bar whispered, "She never said her sister was a judge." Someone else murmured, "11th district." That's not small. Phones were out now. Subtle but present. Screens glowing beneath the linen-covered tables. Names being searched. Headlines being pulled up. Jonathan was still staring. Not angry. Not defensive. Just stunned. He looked like he was finally seeing the painting straight on after years of admiring it from the wrong angle. I didn't look away. Didn't flinch. Camille let out a laugh too high and too late. "I didn't know you were still doing that," she said quickly. "I thought you gave it up." I didn't answer her. I didn't need to. I reached for my napkin, folded it slowly, set it on the table beside my untouched dessert. Then I stood, no drama, no rush. Just presence. That was the thing about truth. It doesn't need volume, it carries its own gravity. I didn't make a speech, I didn't look back. I walked past them all, past the murmurs, the glances, the thawing facade. The silence wasn't awkward, it was overdue. The night air hit me like a reset button. Crisp, unscented, honest. The sky had shifted to a darker shade of indigo, one of those Charleston winter nights where the cold didn't bite, it clarified. I stood just past the hedge-lined terrace in heels that weren't meant for gravel. But I didn't mind. The silence here was different. Not the tense kind that followed truth bombs in glittery rooms. This was earned. Behind me the laughter had thinned. Voices low. I could imagine them now, Camille pulling Jonathan into a corner, her tone tight but sweet, trying to spin it. "She just likes to make a moment about her," she'd say. "She's always been like that." But I didn't make a moment. I named mine. I walked toward my car, no valet. I had parked at the far end on purpose, knowing I might want to leave without waiting for someone to fetch my keys. Each step away from that house felt lighter. I thought of Mara back at the courthouse, probably reading case files with one hand and eating trail mix with the other. She once told me, sometimes dignity is just showing up and not flinching. She was right. But tonight it felt like something more. Like reclaiming a corner of myself that I had allowed Camille to rent for far too long. I opened the door to my car, slipped inside, and for the first time in years let the radio play whatever it wanted. The call came before I even reached the first stoplight. Her name lit up my phone like a warning flare, Camille Mobile. I let it ring once. Twice. Then swiped. "Clarice," she said, her voice stretched tight like a violin string, one note from snapping. I didn't expect you to say it like that." I kept my eyes on the road, steering steady. "My job title." She huffed a breath. "You know what I mean." A pause. That wasn't the time. I didn't realize there was a better one, I said calmly. Or that I needed permission. More silence. Then a soft laugh, too rehearsed. "Look, it's just, Jonathan's parents were there. They're very old-fashioned about status and about being lied to." I cut in. "Because that's what you did. You lied." By omission, by framing, by every introduction you made that deliberately skipped me. Camille went quiet. The kind of quiet that used to follow a slammed door in our childhood home. Then her voice lower. You always find a way to make me feel small. I nearly laughed. You're the one who made sure I had no name tonight. I didn't even need one. I added. They saw me. The line went still again. Then the click of her ring, always twisting it when she was nervous. You're not really going to make this a thing, are you? I exhaled through my nose. Measured. Precise. No, Camille. I'm not going to make anything a thing. I'm just not going to shrink anymore. She didn't respond. And I didn't wait. I ended the call. Not out of anger, but out of choice. Because sometimes the most dignified thing you can do is not explain who you are to someone who's decided not to see you. Back at the hotel, I slipped off my shoes. Set them side by side. Even that felt more stable than the evening I'd just left. The suite smelled faintly of lemon balm, whatever scent the housekeeping team favored. But it couldn't scrub away the perfume of the party still clinging to my skin. Sugar peonies. Overcooked duck. And the sweet, syrupy bite of too much pretense. I sat at the edge of the bed. Rolled my shoulders once. The silence felt real here. Not heavy. Not loaded with forced cheer. Just honest. There was a knock on the door. Not the sharp, percussive kind. This one was soft. Unsure. Like someone testing the weight of a memory. I opened it without asking who. Of course it was her. Camille. She had removed her earrings. The sequins were gone, so was the bravado. You didn't have to slam the door on me, she said, stepping in without waiting. Ending the call like that. I didn't respond, just gestured toward the armchair by the window. If she was going to rewrite the narrative, she could do it seated. She took the chair, pulled her knees close. I didn't mean to hurt you. That sentence again. The old refrain. Used like a shield instead of a confession. You didn't mean to, I repeated. But you did. Camille looked out the window. Below, headlights moved like softened stars across the Charleston streets. I always thought you were judging me, she whispered. In high school, college. Even now. That you saw everything I wasn't. I never judged you, I said. I just stopped letting you speak for me. That got her attention. She looked at me fully for the first time that night. Not as the awkward sister. Not as the shadow at the family table. But as someone real. Someone full. Someone who no longer needed her permission to exist. You're not like me, she said. No, I said softly. I'm not. And for once that wasn't an insult. It was a release. Camille leaned forward, her elbows on her knees like she used to sit when we were kids whenever she wanted something. But her voice wasn't the same. I guess I didn't really believe you'd come, she said. I didn't come for you, I replied. My tone wasn't cruel. Just honest. I'd given her honesty in small, careful doses all my life. Tonight I didn't dilute it. I came to stop disappearing. She winced. A small thing. But for her it was the equivalent of a scream. I never meant to erase you, she said, voice fragile now. I was just trying to matter. I nodded. I understood that more than she realized. We had both learned to survive by taking up different kinds of space. She chose loudness. I chose stillness. But somewhere along the way, her spotlight had become a weapon. And my silence had become a sentence. You always mattered, Camille, I said. But you didn't need to make me invisible to feel it. There it was. The one truth neither of us had ever said aloud. Camille blinked fast. Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked older now. Not in a tired way, but in a human way. As if the glitter had peeled back to reveal the girl underneath. You think he'll still want to marry me? She asked suddenly. I tilted my head. That depends, I said. On whether he wants you or the version of you you've been performing. She looked away. Didn't answer. Didn't argue. Outside the window, the city was quiet. Inside, for once, so were we. And somewhere in that silence, I let go of something. Not forgiveness. Not exactly. But the need to keep proving I was worth hearing. We sat there for a few more minutes, the room slowly thawing. Not with warmth, just the absence of cold. Camille stood up first. She smoothed the hem of her dress like it might help reset the night. Then she glanced back at me. "Are you staying for dessert?" she asked, voice almost playful. A half-hearted attempt at normalcy. "I have an early flight," I said. That was true, I'd changed it during the toast. There was nothing left to witness here. She nodded. Didn't push. Didn't hug me. Just a faint smile, the kind that might become real someday. Then she turned and left the room. I remained seated for a few more breaths, just long enough to hear the hum of the party returning to itself, laughter resuming like a looped track, glasses clinking again. Camille's voice re-entering its usual octave. But something had shifted. Maybe only for me. Maybe that was enough. I walked out without a sound. Down the hallway lined with family portraits where I appeared in none. Past the foyer where my coat had been hung with perfunctory care. Out through the tall glass doors into the night air. The wind off the marsh was sharp, but not cruel. I liked the way it felt on my skin. As I got into the car, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. No makeup smudged, no mascara trails, just my face, calm, clear-eyed, present. For once, I didn't need a room to go quiet to feel seen. I didn't need anyone else to freeze for me to stand still. That was the difference. And as the driver pulled away, I let myself imagine something I hadn't in years. A weekend without noise. A morning without someone else's need shaping mine. A version of life not built from reaction but from choice. I didn't know where that road would lead, but it was mine, and I was already on it. Monday came without fanfare. Like it always does. I was back at the courthouse before the flag had fully risen on the pole outside. The air smelled like printer toner and microwave oatmeal. The only thing louder than the ticking clock was the fluorescent hum overhead. In other words, it was perfect. My chambers were exactly how I'd left them, papers stacked by priority, robe neatly folded on the back of my chair, gavel resting like a paperweight that meant business. No champagne flutes. No sugar peony perfume. No fake smiles. Just silence. And the law. Mara poked her head in right on cue. "Morning, Judge Dalton. You have 3 pretrials and 1 custody review at 10. I nodded. "Anyone difficult?" She grinned. "Define difficult." I smiled back. It was our rhythm. Dry. Efficient. The kind of companionship that didn't require birthday cards or brunches. Just competence. As she handed me a case file, she hesitated. "Oh, by the way, there's a floral delivery downstairs, your name on it." That made me pause. A bouquet wasn't unheard of, grateful parents, overzealous clerks, but rare enough to be curious. "I'll get it later," I said. Mara gave me a look. Not probing. Just registering that I had changed, even if she didn't know how. Outside, the courthouse lawn was empty save for a squirrel trying to wrestle a granola bar wrapper. Inside, I opened the first file. A domestic dispute, the kind that bruises don't always show in. I read it carefully. It's strange how you can walk through fire in someone else's living room and still come back to your desk and do your job like the world hadn't tried to erase you. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the job isn't just about the law. Maybe it's about showing up. And I had shown up. For her engagement, for the truth, for myself. I retrieved the bouquet during the lunch recess. It was waiting at the front desk in a glossy white box tied with a peach ribbon. Too elegant for accident. Too impersonal for apology. The card was tucked under the bow. No handwriting. Just gold foil initials embossed at the bottom, C and J. Inside, the message read, "Thank you for coming, wishing you continued success in all you do." That was it. No mention of the toast. No acknowledgement of what had passed between us. Not even my name. I carried the box back upstairs, set it beside the recycling bin, and poured myself a cup of coffee that tasted like burnt civility. Mara looked up from her desk. "They're beautiful," she said, carefully nodding toward the blooms. Roses mostly. Blush pink soft cream. Tightly coiled. No scent. I gave a small smile. They're polite. Mara didn't press. She never did. But something flickered in her eyes of recognition. She might not have known what had happened at the party, but she knew what a peace offering without peace looked like. I turned back to my office, letting the door click shut behind me. The flowers stayed outside. I sat down and resumed the next case. A land dispute, neighbors fighting over 10 feet of fence and 50 years of bitterness. I underlined a note in the margin. Spite can be subtle. So can inheritance. It occurred to me how strange it was that we spend so much of our lives proving things to people who have already decided what they think of us. We try to earn their approval. Then we try to outgrow it. And sometimes we just try to outlast it. The scentless flowers sat quiet and lovely in the hallway all afternoon. No one asked if they were mine. No one dared touch them. Because something about them said this belongs to someone who doesn't need to explain. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, the court briefs closed and stacked beside a half-drunk glass of wine. I hadn't touched the bouquet. It still sat outside my office door when I left. Let someone else decide what to do with it. The silence in my house was familiar, not lonely, just complete. I'd filled these walls with calm. No photos of family. No holiday decorations left up too long. Just books light and the ticking of the antique clock I'd bought for myself when I passed the bar. I opened my laptop. The party had made the rounds. Photos from Camille's engagement bash were already populating social media, complete with hashtags number Pierce party, number she said yes, number sister love. I scrolled. I didn't look for myself. But there I was, blurred in the background of one group shot, seated near the back behind a cascade of orchids. You could barely tell it was me. And yet, I looked exactly how I felt. Still, watchful. Not diminished. Camille had posted a reel that afternoon. Soft piano music. Footage of her and Jonathan laughing under a canopy of string lights. Slow-motion clinks of champagne glasses. Then, over a filtered sunset, a caption that read, "Sometimes the ones you love the most are just a little hard to understand. But you love them anyway." I closed the screen. Not out of hurt, just quiet finality. Because I finally understood something she never did. Love isn't loud. Love doesn't always come dressed in sequins and captions and tightly worded florals. Sometimes it's silence, sometimes it's boundaries, and sometimes love is walking away. Without needing to announce why. The next day, my office was unusually still. Mara was out with a stomach bug, and I didn't mind the solitude. The hum of the courthouse heating system, the distant clicking of shoes on polished floors, it all felt oddly grounding. Just before noon, my phone buzzed. Camille. I let it ring through. Then again 5 minutes later. This time I answered. Not because I was ready, but because I wanted her to know I wasn't hiding. "Clarice," she breathed, skipping pleasantries. "Do you have a minute?" I stared out the window. The trees were bare, but sunlight bounced off the windshields in the parking lot, making everything feel sharper than it was. "I'm at work," I said simply. "I figured," she replied. "I just wanted to clear the air," that phrase again. Clear the air. As if that would undo a decade of silences, jabs, and rewrites of the past. "You surprised me," she added, her tone lighter, now trying for sisterly. "I mean, I didn't know you still had it in you." "Still had it in me. I never lost it," I said. She laughed nervously. "Jonathan was a little shaken. But he'll get over it. You know, first impressions." A pause. Then in a softer voice, "I didn't mean to embarrass you." "No," I said, "you meant to control the story." That silenced her. She inhaled slowly, and I could almost hear her rehearsing a justification in her head, one she'd likely used for years. "I've spent a long time being careful, Camille. Choosing silence over spectacle. And still it wasn't enough for you. You always think I'm trying to hurt you." "I don't think, I remember." Another pause. Longer, fuller. "You know," she said finally, "for someone who doesn't like drama, you sure made an entrance." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Instead, I hung up. Not out of spite, out of grace. There was no apology coming, not a real one. And I didn't need it. I stayed late that evening. The office was nearly empty by the time I powered down my computer. Outside Charleston had cooled to a mellow gray, and the courthouse steps echoed under my shoes like a slow metronome. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I stood in the quiet and let the dark settle around me. There was a mirror above the fireplace. I don't know why I walked toward it, only that something pulled me. Maybe it was the weight of the day, or maybe I needed to see if I looked any different now that the mask had cracked. I did. Not younger, not lighter, but whole. Camille had always lived under a spotlight. I had always lived in the shadow she thought I cast. But that night at her engagement party, that wasn't my spotlight. That was just the truth stepping into the room and staying long enough for people to notice. There was no triumph in it, no victory march, only peace. I walked to the kitchen and pulled out the envelope. The invitation still sat there, rose gold edges glowing faintly in the soft lamplight. I opened it again, letting the card fall flat on the counter. It didn't matter what the card said, it never had. What mattered was that I went. I showed up. Not as her older sister. Not as the family disappointment, but as myself. The woman who kept showing up even when no one noticed. The woman who was done shrinking herself to fit someone else's story. I reached for my phone. Deleted Camille's message. Deleted the photos Mara had texted from the party. I didn't need proof of anything. What I needed was already mine. And tomorrow I would return to my courtroom, not because of pride or power or revenge, but because I had work to do. Because people still needed quiet strength to stand beside them while the noise tried to drown them out. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly who I was. The first time I saw my name in print, it was on a sticky note taped to my dorm door, Clarice Dalton, room 213. Quiet section. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. Now, nearly 2 decades later, my name showed up again, but not the way I'd expected. I got the call from a friend at the courthouse early Monday morning. She sounded nervous. "Have you seen the paper?" she asked. "No," I said, still tying my hair back. "Why?" There was a pause, then her voice softened. "Camille's engagement announcement is on page 3. You're mentioned." My stomach didn't drop. It didn't rise either, it just held still. I hung up, slid on my shoes, and walked to the corner store a block from my apartment. The owner, George, greeted me like he always did, one nod, 2 coffees warming on the side. "You look like you need the strong blend today," he said. I smiled. "Don't I always?" The newspaper was thin, weekend edition, and folded awkwardly like it had been read already. I took it to the park bench outside, sat down, and turned straight to page 3. There they were, Camille and Jonathan. Smiling in coordinated outfits, her hand angled just right to show off the ring. The article was fluff. A write-up about the upcoming wedding. Her charity work. His new real estate development. But the last paragraph caught me. And among the intimate guest list was the bride's sister, 11th District Judge Clarice Dalton, who was said to be in attendance for the event held at the family's Charleston estate. Said to be. Not quoted. Not photographed. Just whispered. I folded the paper back and stared at the fountain across the street. The water sputtered slightly like it needed cleaning, but no one seemed to mind. People walked past it every day without noticing the rust along the edges. That's how it had always been. But this time they noticed. They may not have said my name aloud at the party, but now it was in ink. Permanent. Even Camille couldn't undo that. The first knock came just after sundown. I was in the kitchen stirring lentil soup and listening to the faint hum of the dishwasher when I heard it, 3 soft taps. Not urgent, not confident, just hesitant. I opened the door and there she was. Camille. No makeup this time, hair in a loose bun, no sequins or champagne in sight, just my sister holding a half-empty bottle of wine like a peace offering. "I didn't think you'd answer," she said, not meeting my eyes. "I didn't think you'd come," I replied. We stood there for a moment, the space between us heavier than the winter air outside. Then, without saying anything more, I stepped back. "Let her in." She sat at the dining table while I poured 2 glasses of water. I didn't offer the wine. "How'd you find my address?" I asked. "Mom." "Of course. She told me not to come," Camille added. "Said I'd only make things worse. And yet here you are." "I didn't come to fight." I took a seat across from her, folding my hands in my lap. "Then why?" She stared at her fingers, twisting the stem of the wine bottle label. For the first time in years, I wasn't the center of the room. "And it wasn't because I didn't try hard enough, it was because of you." "That's not what you said in your toast." I panicked, she said quickly. "I thought if I made people laugh, they'd forget how nervous I was. But when you said who you were, Clarice the judge, I saw it in their faces. All these people who'd always looked at me like I was the impressive one, they didn't know you were the one holding the real power." Her voice cracked a little and she swallowed. "I guess I came here to ask why you even showed up. Why sit through all that?" I leaned back slightly. The window above the sink reflected our shapes, hers leaning forward, mine still. "Because I needed to remember I could." She blinked. Could what walk into a room that never made space for me and still stand tall in it? We sat in silence for a few minutes. Just the ticking of the wall clock between us. She reached for her purse, pulled out a folded paper. "A job offer came through," she said, sliding it across the table. "Marketing position. Nashville. We're leaving Charleston after the wedding." I didn't touch it, didn't need to. "I hope it works out for you," I said. Camille stood, her hands now empty. "You don't hate me." "No," I answered, standing too. "But I finally stopped needing your permission not to." After Camille left, I didn't sit down right away. Instead, I found myself walking to the small hallway closet, one I hadn't opened in months. Inside was a box labeled in my own handwriting, "Clarice, college years." I hadn't touched it in ages. It had survived 2 apartment moves, a leak in one building, and one particularly careless ex who mistook it for recycling. I brought the box into the living room and sat on the rug, pulling back the flaps like a patient opening an old wound. There on top was the photo. It was bent slightly at the corners, the gloss worn from time. But the image was still clear, Camille and me. I must have been 12, she was 9. We stood on the porch of our childhood home holding ice cream cones that were melting faster than we could eat them. Camille had sprinkles. I had chocolate chips. She was grinning wide, carefree, already striking a pose. I was squinting into the sun, standing a little behind her. My expression was softer. Almost like I knew even then that I'd be the quieter one. I ran my thumb along the bottom edge. Back then, before boys and parties and whispered favoritism, we were just 2 girls in summer waiting for the next big thing to happen. I sat with the photo for a long time. Not crying, not nostalgic. Just remembering. Remembering that even the sharpest memories start soft. Eventually, I tucked it back into the box gently and closed the lid. Some stories didn't need to be rewritten. Just acknowledged. And maybe that was enough. The next morning, I found a text from Camille. "If you're still in town, coffee, no emojis, no sarcastic comments. Just a line of plain words that felt almost adult." I didn't reply right away. Instead, I drove to a small cafe near the marsh, the one with the brick patio and the ivy-covered fence. We'd gone there once years ago. She'd called it boring. Now she was already seated when I arrived. She stood up when she saw me, then sat back down, unsure of the rules between us. "Thanks for coming," she said, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. I nodded. "You said coffee." She offered a small smile. "I didn't think you'd say yes." I almost didn't. We sat for a while, the silence thick but not sharp. She finally looked up from her cup. "I didn't mean to humiliate you." "At the party." I didn't respond. Not right away. Because part of me didn't believe she didn't mean it. "I think you did mean to," I said quietly. "But I also think you didn't know why." Camille blinked. "That's fair." Another pause. Then, growing up, she said it always felt like you were the measuring stick. The impossible standard. I raised an eyebrow. I thought I was the invisible one. Well, she sighed, I guess we were both wrong. The honesty caught me off guard. Not because she was wrong, but because she was trying. I didn't go to the party to prove anything I told her. I went because I wanted to stop shrinking just to make room for everyone else. She looked down. I've always been loud, she said. And I never realized how much space I took up. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever heard from her. And in that moment, it was enough. The flight back to Raleigh was uneventful. Gray clouds beneath the window, a seatmate snoring lightly in 13A, and my phone set to airplane mode, not that anyone was calling. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. What I felt was done. Camille and I didn't hug when we parted at the cafe. We didn't make plans. We didn't pretend we'd suddenly become sisters who sent each other holiday cards. But something had been unclenched between us. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. We just stood still long enough to see each other for what we were. Not rivals, not opposites. Just two women trying to make peace with how they were raised and how they chose to walk forward. At the courthouse the next morning, Mara placed 2 files on my desk without saying a word about Charleston. But as she turned to leave, she paused. I saw the clip, she said over her shoulder. You looked centered. I smiled without lifting my head. Funny, I said. It took a room full of noise for me to finally hear myself. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. The gavel on my desk gleamed faintly in the morning light. Not everything needed a trial, some truths just stood. Without applause, without permission. Just like me. I didn't walk away from Charleston to prove anything. I walked away because I no longer needed to shrink just to keep the peace. Sometimes family doesn't begin with forgiveness. It begins with choosing not to pass the hurt along. And the quietest kind of strength is knowing when not to clap back but to stand tall anyway. If this story reminded you of someone in your life or a silence you've carried, I'd be honored to hear your thoughts below. We heal in small echoes, not just grand gestures.